Margot Robbie lands triple Axel performance in Tonya, which is loaded with too many laughs. TooFab review. It's hard to hate all of the scummy characters in Tonya Harding's tragic life when you're too busy laughing at them. Margot Robbie got famous for playing a bombshell who, for a brief time in the 1990s, had the world in the palm of her hand and gold around her neck. Now, 3 years after breaking out in The Wolf of Wall Street, she's returning to that era in another tragic story about a pursuit of gold, though the context and details couldn't be more different. It's been clear throughout her short career, even in Suicide Squad, that Robbie is a very talented actress, but she's also been able to coast a bit on the big personalities of her characters and her own endless charm. In playing the infamous former figure skater Tonya Harding, Robbie is given none of those advantages and is stripped as far as it's possible of her beauty, which had not gone unemphasized in many of her prior roles. And in turn, the movie, in theaters today, marks her best performance to date. Harding has long been something of a national punchline. After she was implicated in the vicious attack on fellow American Olympian Nancy Kerrigan in early 1994, and later barred for life from competitive skating, Harding went on one of those uniquely American odysseys of desperation, trading dwindling celebrity or infamy for smaller and smaller paychecks. A short-lived boxing career and other indignities have been fodder for TMZ, late-night hosts, and social media jokers. She's become a punchline more than a person. What's so strange about Tonya is that the film continues that tradition of mockery, but also clearly empathizes with Harding. The assault on Kerrigan by two associates of Harding's ex-husband happened right near the inception of the 24-hour news cycle. CNN rose to prominence during 1991's Gulf War, and so people were hungry for every little detail about the case. But without an internet or larger national conversation, the larger context of Harding's life, relationships, and upbringing largely went undiscussed, which was a crucial exemption. Most of Tonya tracks her life leading up to the fateful night a third-rate hitman bashed in Kerrigan's ankle with a pipe. And it's largely not pretty. Her life had been a constant uphill struggle to that point, for a myriad of reasons. Harding's single mother was psychotic, which only exacerbated the fact that she grew up poor, had trouble in school, got into an abusive relationship early on, and was largely an outcast from the one place she truly belonged, the skating rink. Allison Janney is fantastic as Harding's bulldog of a mother, Lavana, who takes zero shit from anyone. A single mom who works as a waitress, she stands up for herself in a way that working-class people often feel is not possible for them. Lavana won't take no for an answer when she decides that little Tonya needs to be trained as a figure skater, for example, and works extra shifts to pay for the coaching once she secures it for her daughter. But she also won't ever let young Tonya rest, and often beats the crap out of her, drunk and spiteful towards the one innocent person in her life. Janney is such a good comedic actress that you wind up developing far more affection for her than you should. Quirky, grouchy characters are often fan favorites in movies and TV, but anti-heroes don't really exist in real life. She was a mean woman who beat up her kid mentally and physically, forever destroying her self-confidence and leading her toward a lot of bad decisions. One of those decisions was Jeff Gillooly, a local kid with whom Harding instantly fell in love. Because Lavana was such a witch, Harding moved in with Gillooly when they were still teenagers, which in turn led to her being stuck in a relationship with a guy who would ultimately become a wife-beating creep with a mustache. But again, in Tonya he's played by Sebastian Stan, who is handsome and charming, and makes you like the creep that would ultimately lead to Harding's downfall. Not that Lavana and Gillooly were the only ones responsible for the sad broken woman Harding would become. The figure skating world is a snobby, elitist, close-minded bunch, and were even more so in the early 90s. They didn't like Tonya because she was poor and wore second-hand or improvised costumes hand-sewn by her mother. And because she didn't have the natural grace of some skaters, she was more of an athlete, performing incredible tricks. She was the first American to successfully land the triple axel in competition, but did not look especially feminine on the ice. They would often imply as much when she got lower than deserved scores, noting that skating is not just about the skating. It's hard to totally buy Robbie as a teenager. Or as Harding, who is far from what is considered traditionally beautiful. But with her hair dried out and braces stuck on her teeth, it's believable enough. Considering how much she otherwise melts into the role. She's at turns nervous and defiant, scared and enthusiastic. She wavers from confidence to bracing to be hit again. And while she occasionally hits back, there's no way she can handle the onslaught from so many people, both in her life and later around the world. Later on, the movie becomes a bit of a caper, like on Logan Lucky, but with even bigger idiots, because that's the best way to tell the somewhat complicated, if very stupid, story about Kerrigan's assault. By that point, everyone but Harding is a bit of a caricature, which takes away from the severity of what she's dealing with. It's hard to hate people you're laughing at. So while Tonya is a fun watch and does the service of telling more of Harding's tale, creating real empathy for her, there are just too many laughs in such a tragic story. Especially now, amidst the Me Too movement, it's hard to chuckle at beatings with cheerful, ironic music played underneath. It's a fun time at the movies, but doesn't deliver total justice for its subject. Not that Harding will be surprised by that. Tonya's costume designer on why she didn't want to take a cheap shot at 90s fashion. Jennifer Johnson, the costume designer for Tonya in theaters today, isn't a fan of irony. In fact, she was hesitant to take on the Tonya Harding biopic in the first place. When I first heard of the idea that this movie was a possibility, I was very skeptical, she said the day after meeting Harding for the first time. At the LA premiere, there was so much of a strange cult interest in Tonya. There was even an off-Broadway play, I think, and I was sensitive in that I didn't want to work on anything that was making fun of her life and her situation. But after reading Craig Gillespie's sensitive script, the costume designer instantly changed her mind. Johnson signed on and went to work recreating Harding's crafty and ill-fitting early skating costumes, as well as the infamous ice queen's everyday wardrobe from her teenage years through adulthood. It was in those latter years during the 90s when Harding became famous for being the first American woman to ever land a triple axel in competition, that her personal style took on a life of its own. Her mother stopped sewing her costumes, and Harding began to ignore the fashion lessons doled out by her fancy, wealthy coach Diane Rawlinson. Johnson did her research with a fine-toothed comb, starting with studying videos made by Harding's high school friend that showed her shopping with Rawlinson, skating with her erratic mother always lurking nearby, and now and then just hanging out like a normal kid. The shopping trip with Diane was interesting. Johnson said. She's shopping for a dress, and they're going to Ralph Lauren, Jessica McClintock, Gone Sachs, but you can tell right away that it wasn't what Tonya was interested in. Harding's aesthetic changed drastically when she started dating Jeff Gillooly. According to Johnson, you saw this really sexy, independent, and happy side of Tonya, where she started playing with her waistline and wearing little camisoles. But after they were married, and once the severe and unspeakable abuse began by Gillooly, something odd happened. They started dressing alike, wearing similar sweaters, the same jeans, tennis shoes, turtlenecks, and leather bombers. We were careful to switch the color palettes of the clothes as she went through these transitions with Jeff. The light, bright time of their courtship and the severity and darkness of their on, again, off, again marriage. The dark side of Harding's story was exactly why Johnson didn't want her work to come off as a cheesy, humorous nod to 90s-era clothes. There could be no irony in this real-life narrative filled with unimaginable abuse and pain. I wasn't like, oh, hey, here's your acid-wash jeans, floral bodysuits, and Zcatorici boots. that just felt phony, Johnson explains. Her skating costumes are just nuts. And you can't get around that, but if we went that far with her everyday wardrobe, it would have had an element of making fun of her in that era. She's just so much more than that. Johnson ended up falling in love with Harding after studying her. She also developed a slightly raised brow at the way that the fashion industry has played up the 90s nostalgia trend this year. I think the majority of the examples are cheap shots of the style during this era. You can walk into any Urban Outfitters and adorn yourself with the perfect, on-the-nose 90s outfit. For the film, in particular, that just wasn't interesting to me. I wanted to make it feel real and authentic, and not a millennial fashion moment. After the premiere earlier this week, Johnson spotted Harding at the after-party and decided to introduce herself. She gave me a big hug and said, "My God. When I was watching the movie I thought, how did they get a hold of my skating costumes and my clothes?" Johnson said. The woman I met that night was the same woman who had just landed the triple axel, and that's the Tonya I like. She is defined by that moment, and that's what she wants to be remembered for. Harding may indeed have a cult following, but after this film perhaps those outside of that circle will change their negative view of her. Perhaps they'll also look at 90s fashion with less cheekiness. Then again, as Johnson admits with a laugh, you already see Jeff's whole look when you walk into Balenciaga right now. I think Tonya's leather jacket and those Gervo high-waist jeans will really hit a chord with a certain age group.